Good afternoon, everyone. So throughout the past summer, we did a capstone project aims at identifying corporate climate decarbonization pathways. And we have 5 members in our team, which is Chloe, Iris, Anna, Sophie, and Galia. So in today's presentation, we will go over the introduction, methodology, findings, and conclusions like next step and recommendations to the companies. So before the actual presentation, I think everyone should be aware of the decarbonization problem in the current market. So decarbonization is complex due to technology, financial, and market barriers. And there's a lack of suitable products and understanding of business needs to facilitate the transition from the carbon-intensive energy sources. And that's why our project is meaningful. And it's been an honor to working with Time CO2 in this summer. So Time CO2 is a company dedicated to supporting decarbonization efforts across various sectors with a focus on both individual and business. Time CO2 offers innovative solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So first, Time CO2's climate action portfolio products allows individuals to actively participate in reducing emissions by crowdfunding emissions reduction projects. And through its media products, Time CO2 helps companies share their climate success stories. And this not only celebrates their achievements, but also inspires others to follow suit. And finally, with its B2B decarbonization product, Time CO2 provides tailored support to companies on their decarbonization journeys. And this includes guidance, tools, and resources to help companies transition to more sustainable practice. And this part is what our group is helping with, assisting Time CO2 in their development of their future B2B products. So this is an overview of our capstone roadmap. We started with understanding Time CO2's objectives and then with considering Time CO2's capabilities and the market needs, come up with potential opportunities in the future. So next we will talk about the 2 most important parts of our project. And first, in general, we did landscape analysis, which is the preliminary research, first for helping us and Time CO2 to understand existing situations like goals, efforts, achievements, and failures. And then we do the market research, which is the semi-structured interviews. They were conducted to highlight the future plans and the challenges in the corporate decarbonization market. So let's begin with the landscape analysis. So at the beginning, we planned to do analysis for 5 sectors, but due to some changes of Time CO2's business focus, we dropped into 3 sectors and divided Beautiful and Delicious into 2 different sectors, which is beauty and food. So for the results, for the health industry, we look at 13 healthcare companies. 3/4 have reports on greenhouse gases emissions, but only half have net zero goals. And many of them are missing scope 3 emissions, and they do not acknowledge their net zero barriers. So many companies focused on reducing waste and water use in the supply chain process, as well as achieving energy efficiency for buildings. We also look at the beauty industrials, which consists of 11 companies in cosmetics and fashion. Most of them have disclosed their greenhouse gases emissions, and about 2/3 have a net zero targets. Overall, these companies want to follow the circular economic principles, and they want to make their supply chain more transparent. However, we found that there's no standardized definition of green efforts across the board. Next, we researched the food industries, which will look at 11 food and beverage companies. We found all of them have reports on their emissions, and there were only 2 without a net zero goal. Generally, for the ones that have a net zero goal, they want to hit 50% emission reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Due to the nature of their business, their decarbonization roadmaps focus on agriculture, food, waste use, packaging, and land use. So finally, for the electrification industry, we look at 9 companies across 3 countries. About 90% of the companies report greenhouse gas emissions, and 100% have net zero goals. And this trend seems very promising. However, companies are generally focused on reducing their Scope 1 emissions rather than Scope 3 emissions. So as a result, the preliminary research provides a broad overview of the industrial landscape regarding decarbonization, while the interviews we're going to talk about provide a critical next step to offering a deeper exploration of specific challenges, needs, and opportunities.
Great. So as Lee mentioned, we did a landscape analysis that was primarily just using public domain research, and it just helped us formulate what kinds of questions we wanted to ask employers and employees when we did the interview portion of our project. So based on the landscape analysis, we came up with about 16 general questions that we wanted to ask interviewees, and we came up with a few industry-specific ones for the sectors that we listed before. And we did all the outreach ourselves, so we just did cold LinkedIn messages to folks, being like, hey, we're students of Columbia, we're working with Time CO2, would you want to talk to us off the record, non-attributional, about decarbonization projects that you're working on? And we conducted about 30-minute interviews with folks who responded back, and we had 2 people on those interviews as well. So you can see, again, some of the reasons, why people may have not responded to us, because again, we reached out to over 200 folks and we only received about 12 to 14 interviews. So again, if we had maybe started this project a little bit earlier, had more time, there would be more opportunity to get more interviews. And these are just some screenshots of reasons why people might not have been as willing to speak to us. Again, even though it was non-attributional, a lot of folks felt like that they, were either under NDA contracts or they didn't really want to publicly speak about decarbonization efforts. So as you can see, it's pretty difficult reaching out to people via cold call, but there is hope, and we did have interviews. But in addition to the interviews, just because we realized we weren't getting as many as we wanted to, we also supplemented the primary interviews with secondary data collection, which we used public interviews from sustainability, like chiefs of sustainability or other folks at the organizations that we wanted to get interviews for, but might not have been able to. And we sort of transcribed those in addition to the primary data sources, which we transcribed. And after we gathered all the information, again, we had a lot of notes and a lot of transcripts from all the interviews. We used NVivo, which was a qualitative data analysis tool, to help us code the different transcripts into buckets that we created. And as you can see, this is a screenshot of an example of an interview process. So for example, we have the different codes on the side, which we all created here. So it could be barriers to decarbonization. And under that, we would have the various specific attributes that we created, such as cost, cultural values or whatnot, drivers of decarbonization, which could include regulation, or competing on sustainability products with other companies. And they sort of show up on the side here. So it makes it really easy for us to see at the end, after all this information, that we can sort of come up with archetypes for folks.
So based on these research results, we can see a clear trend across different sectors. So first one, in regions with stronger government policies and strict timelines like Europe, companies are more aggressive on their decarbonization efforts. And 2, the customer awareness is developing, particularly in the beauty and the fashion sectors, like where younger generations are concerned about their social impacts, the social impacts of the products they consume. And companies are making efforts to communicate and educate their sustainability initiatives to their employees. And in the electrification sector, companies are investing more on renewable energy as a key strategy. And finally, companies are focusing more on reducing the waste, like including different ways to reuse plastics and other materials.
Great. And so general challenges that we found that overlapped with a lot of the interviews that we conducted and the research that we conducted sort of remain within these sort of broad buckets. So Scope 3 emissions obviously account for a large portion of an organization's emissions. And that was something that a lot of businesses acknowledged that was an issue. And they were trying to sort of create a strategy around their net zero goals to sort of target those Scope 3 emissions because they are pretty challenging to target. Decarbonization definitions, again, this was more prevalent in maybe small or medium-sized businesses that didn't really have a sustainability team that had the expertise and understood a lot of these, reporting metrics that maybe a larger, Fortune 500 company might have a team that was able to understand all of that and have expertise in that. Again, data availability. So again, for a larger company, it might have been a little bit easier to maybe outsource it to a third party, or again, just have their own internal team create greenhouse gas reporting metrics to see how much emissions they were currently emitting and what steps they could take to reduce that. But again, maybe some small or medium-sized companies don't have that, and it might be costly for them to achieve that, data availability. And business objectives might conflict with decarbonization strategies and other objectives that a company might have. So for example, a healthcare company that we talked to that, let's say, manufactures little plastic tubes that are used in surgery might have to go through a extensive certificate process to make sure that the product is safe to use in a healthcare setting. And let's say they want to reduce the plastic or change the materials that the tubing is made out of, they might need to get recertified or go through a lengthy and perhaps costly process to do that. And it might conflict with some of the objectives that they have to either supply that to healthcare users or perhaps financial incentives as well. And again, using in vivo, this is sort of a pie chart that we created to you can sort of see visually what the barriers breakdown were. And again, the large portion of there were a lot of other barriers that we didn't really list. It would be too confusing to have all of them there. So some categories that might fall in the other section could be, regulatory concerns, because each sector have different regulations that might pose barriers to decarbonization, or other things as well. And we also sort of mapped out what decarbonization actions organizations were taking. So we sort of categorized it into administrative, applicative, collaborative, and communicative. So administrative could be, again, collecting greenhouse gas reporting for an organization's emissions. Applicative could be like a product or process improvement. Collaborative could be working with, let's say, third-party suppliers to reduce, again, those Scope 3 emissions. And communicative could be providing those greenhouse gas or sustainability reports to the public, since it's not a regulation for an organization to do so. And again, some of these limitations I mentioned before, again, with the interviews, we sort of had a small sample size. So again, if this project were to continue, we'd want to reach out to more folks and get more interviews to really build out our analysis. Again, with the coding part of the section, we had 2 of our teammates code the data. So again, there might be a little bit of bias, because let's say someone says something like, our business has financial targets that we need to hit. Are those financial? Like, is that a cost, or is that might fall under a different type of barrier? Again, because we weren't able to get interviews from people who work directly in the decarbonization strategy aspect of a business, there were some inconsistencies with the types of interviews we were able to get from folks. And again, just because we were having a conversation with our interviewees, we had a list of questions to start with, but again, depending on the conversation, different things might have taken a turn. And some next steps for Time CO2 would be for them to really continue to conduct research on B2B products on the market. So these are some examples of organizations that we found a lot of businesses that we spoke to mention that they work with. And we want Time CO2 to continue building partnerships with other businesses in the field. But again, to make sure that they also use the opportunity to create a product that might fill a gap in the market that maybe isn't currently offered. And again, try to focus on the Scope 3 emissions, since there's a big market opportunity for them to address that issue. And just in general, some key takeaways from what we saw from a lot of organizations and some things that we thought were important to keep in mind is that organizations really need to define what their goals are. They need to document whatever their existing emissions are, because if you don't know what you're emitting now, how are you going to achieve net zero in the future? And they just need to develop new products and services that are offered on behalf of the organization. And they also need to focus on maybe getting standards to be standardized across the board, because it's a little bit difficult for them to, let's say, compete or meet the same standards if there are none that are existing. And all of these factors would help deliver net zero goals in the future. And does anyone have any questions for us or the team?
Thank you guys. It was a great presentation, very informative. And yeah, so you mentioned that you kind of had sometimes lack of responses from interviewees. Would you attribute that more to like intentional avoidance of taking a stance from company spokespeople, or just more time constraints?
I think it really depends on who you're reaching out to, because again, we sort of had like a whole Excel chart where like we want to reach out to 3 people to start with. And we just did LinkedIn searches being like, oh, sustainability, someone who works at X company. And I think it really depended on if that person was actually involved in maybe decarbonization efforts. So again, chief of sustainability officer is not going to respond to us, but maybe someone who works more internal to the team, who knows a little bit more, would be the prime target for us. But again, I think they felt like they were bounded. They were like, oh, just look at our sustainability report. We don't really have any more information that we don't already put out there for us. And I think it was interesting because the interviews that we did get, a lot of them, could be from more smaller, medium-sized businesses of folks who maybe weren't as tied down to, let's say, public reporting, and might have more flexibility to release information.
Hi, great presentation. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you chose the companies that you reviewed.
So like for the preliminary research, we choose mostly like the medium-sized or large-sized companies to start with, because they have more available reports and white papers online, and we have more accessible resources to get research on. And like in generally, for the large-sized companies, no matter in which sector, they have more. They put more attention on like looking at sustainability, and they already put some efforts on the decarbonization journeys, and that's why we choose those companies.
Cool. Okay.